Here's the plan for you.
All right, here we go. We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today. It is Monday, August 2nd, 2021, 5:30 in the afternoon. I would just ask all of those in attendance to be sure that your electronic devices are either on silent or on vibrate to keep the distractions down to a minimum. Roll call, please.
Evans? Here. Janser?
Here.
Olson? Here. Pittner?
Here.
Padragula?
Here.
Ross?
Here.
Sitma?
Here. Number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number 3 on our agenda this afternoon is the mayor's report. I tried to keep this a little bit higher level with just kind of the major items so that the report wouldn't run nearly as long, as there were quite a few activities this past month. Starting off in early July, I did have a sit-down conversation along with Mr. Zakian with Congressman Kelly Armstrong, who came to City Hall, talk about not only some of the national programs that are going on, but to reassure that if we do have any issues, that his office is certainly always willing to communicate. On the 12th, the Water Topics Committee tour was down at the Snake Creek Pump Station. The city manager, Dan Jonason, and some other staff were also joining us on that tour, this being the pump station that is the essentially intake for the NAS project. NAS pumping station to take it to the Biota plant. It was later that afternoon that Biota plant construction was toured. On the very next day, the 13th, I did testify down at the Water Topics Committee down in Bismarck, and that was regarding flood control and then the cost, and one more time in reinforcing that we do need to get the time build down from that 20-year mark down to 12 years. On the 19th, we did have a regular city council meeting. The 20th then was closing arguments for the parking structure trial. I did put this up here once again to thank all of the city staff who spent a tremendous amount of time not only preparing for that, but also testifying at the trial itself and working with council. And of course, we all saw that the city came out on the winning side of that litigation. So once again, thank you to all the city staff that put in all the extra time, and certainly greatly appreciated. On the 21st, I did have a COVID recap that was coordinated through MSU for the International Forum discussion. Alderwoman Evans was also on that call, where we got to talk with folks from all around the world about Minot's mitigation efforts and our 2020 year on how we dealt with COVID. 22nd, I did have then some follow-up interviews on the 22nd. Also, the NDR open house for City Hall right here on the 23rd. Then we also did have the 50th Resilient Homebuyer closing at North Dakota Title and Guarantee. That was a benchmark. That would be number 50 for part of that process that got us to basically pushing more money into that program to help keeping us pushing forward and meeting all of our deadlines for NDR. So that took us to the 23rd, and that was the welcome and introduction at the Leonard Skinner concert at the North Dakota State Fair. Great turnout. It looked like they released numbers 310,000 plus for this year's North Dakota State Fair. So congratulations to the fair folks. Certainly a great return after the 2020 cancellation due to COVID. On the 24th, I did have the opportunity to ride once again in the North Dakota State Fair Parade. Appreciate my wife joining me for that, despite quite a bit of reservations for that. The 28th, then, we did have the Friends of the Fair Social. At the 29th, we had 2 more flood protection home acquisitions. On the 30th, ABC News 2020 was in town. And for some folks in the audience, they may or may not remember that. It's been quite a few years, but the Dr. Birnbaum trial and conviction back in the late 90s, early 2000s is the follow-up on why ABC News was in town. And then on the 30th, the North Dakota State Fair 4-H showmanship training competition. If anybody missed this, not in person, they missed me touring around with a Nigerian dwarf milk goat that didn't even come up to my knee. And trying to show that in a ring with a bunch of judges and other folks when it's really hot, it was very educational for me, as I grew up around in and on a farm, but certainly did not have any dealings with goats. But it was a great event for the 4-Hers to really get to meet a lot of state lawmakers and leaders from around the state of North Dakota and interact. A big thank you to all of the 4-Hers and everyone else, including Governor Burgum and Ag Commissioner Doug Goring, who came out, and certainly for my 4-H representative, who did her best to try to turn me into a showman for goats, but evidently the student was not good enough because I didn't take first, but thank you to her. Other than that, I did have 20 other meetings of regular city business and a numerous amount of phone calls, emails, social media, and other staff interactions through the month of July. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions of any of my activities or other goings-ons for the month.
Will you be asking us to allow goats in city limits for your backyard now?
Well, I would say, in looking to Alderman Janser and many others, we actually went down this road before, and I have no interest in bringing back the animal ordinances for review. With that, we will turn to our city manager for item number 4 on the city manager's report.
I will keep it brief this evening, as there's a memo in your packet, but I'll spend the bulk of my discussion with council with the budget presentation later on in the meeting, where we'll cover a lot of what we've been working on here for the last couple of weeks. So unless there's any questions from council, I don't have anything else on our city manager report.
Any questions for our city manager on his written report? Thank you, Harold. That takes us to our next item, and that is our city attorney report, number 5. Ms. Hendershot.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, I submitted a written report, and the only thing I wanted to highlight from that is just a reminder that we have open record, open meeting training on Wednesday at 10:30 in this room. So just a reminder of that.
Any questions for our city attorney? One question, Kelly, that I've been asked a few times, and this might be a good opportunity to maybe just briefly push that out there, is the next step with litigation from Cypress and the parking ramps is next steps.
Sure. Mr. Mayor and members of council, we're working on our final costs and disbursements paperwork that's going to be submitted to the court. The city is eligible for some reimbursement of certain costs, so we're working on that. That should be filed within the next couple of days. Once judgment is entered, there is a 60-day appeal period where the Cypress Development could appeal the decision to the North Dakota Supreme Court. And then after that, there would likely be post-judgment discovery, but we'll be back before the council to discuss that and any next steps with regard to that.
All right.
If that, I can answer any other more particular questions if there are any.
Any further questions or follow-ups? Alderman Bittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe a question for Kelly or whomever else. As far as moving forward, would it be foolish for the city to move forward on anything on these structures now that we have a judgment in our favor that we have control of them? Can we move forward, or do we have to wait until, would we be wise to wait until there's any appeal or not?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, it would be up to the council on how it wanted to proceed and the timing for how it wants to proceed. I would assume that there would be some reflection period and some, weighing of options on how to proceed in what fashion. So I guess that would be up to the council's discretion. We'll know a lot more in the next 60 days.
Good enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hendershot. Our next item is number 6, and that is the consent items. There were 18 different items in our consent agenda. I've been asked to pull 6.16 for individual discussion. I would look to both council and to the audience if there are any other items that need to be pulled for individual discussion. Otherwise, they will be passed with staff recommendations. Seeing none, what are the wishes of the council?
Move approval on remaining items.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve the remaining items. Is there a second? Second. Second by Alderman Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Once again, the motion is to pass the consent items of 6.1 through 6.15 and 6.17 and 6.18. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Quadrigula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 6.16 on our agenda here is the no parking on 25th Street Northwest and 5th Avenue Northwest. The Engineering Department, in conjunction with Bel Air Elementary, are proposing a parking restriction to 25th Street Northwest regarding the east-west crosswalk just north of 5th Avenue Northwest, similar to the other parking restrictions near schools. The Engineering Department is proposing this parking restriction to only be for school days between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., and this is a systematic effort to improve the pedestrian safety. The recommendation of the full council is to pass the resolution to add a parking restriction to the following location. Again, that is the east side of 25th Street Northwest, north 10 feet to north 50 feet from the center of the 5th Avenue Northwest intersection. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second? Second. Second by Alderman Ross. Alderman Pittner, you would ask for this one to be pulled for individual discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. A citizen in this neighborhood reached out to me with some concerns of the no parking and where it would be aligned. So I pulled it in order for them to have a chance to speak and address some of the concerns they had, and also for Stefan to maybe provide some clarity on this as well. So
This would be an opportunity for anyone to come forward who does have concerns or maybe some comments about the proposed restrictions. If you would just state your name and city of residence for the record. Don, if you could hit that little gray button right up here, see the microphone at the base? There's a little gray button right at the bottom on the side. Keep going down to the base right down here. Maybe Stefan, oh, there you go. And then pull the microphone down so we can all hear.
Okay, name's Don Pfeiffer. I live at that 424 25th Street Northwest. Lived there for over 25 years. I know what the city's trying to do for safety, and I'm not against it, for safety purposes. But, I have a kid that still lives at home. He parks out in the street. Putting another no parking sign, I don't think is gonna fix anything, because in the morning and afternoons when the kids are getting out of school and stuff, it is a battle zone, because people want to pick up their kids. But there's so many no parking signs around there that if they were to abide by all them signs, where they're gonna pick up their kids, it'd be impossible then for them to pick up their kids. I'm just saying is, I understand the obstruction, a little bit of obstruction, but I just don't think that's gonna be an answer. Because when Stefan from the city was over there, I was discussing with him, there's a lady that was going across the crosswalk. We were standing on the edge of the asphalt, and the vehicle coming down the street really didn't slow down. She had 100% visibility. I mean, people are gonna drive the way they do, but like I said, I'm not against the safety of the kids though. So that's like saying another sign, I don't think it's gonna make that difference. I suggested maybe like what they have by the college, those strobe style walkway crossing. I think that could be a possibility. But I guess it's kind of my thoughts on that sign. I guess it's pushing me farther back, I guess, and that's just gonna give more parking space for after school, before school. But like I said, I'm not against the safety part of it though.
Thank you, Don. Any questions for Mr. Pfeiffer? Appreciate it, sir.
Okay.
And maybe Stefan, if you could come forward and provide a little more information on the recommendation for the no parking areas during school hours. And just in reference to the flashing signs over by Minot State University, and maybe you can correct me, but if I remember correctly, those were about $75,000 to install a
About
number of years ago?
35,000.
It was 35, okay, thank you.
Derek, can you pull up the PDF that we spoke about? All right, you can just leave it right here, Derek. Mayor, council, so I actually saw this driving around one day this past spring and kind of saw, looking around, I wonder if I can draw on here.
maybe not. So as I was driving north on 25th Street, I saw the car on the right. I'm like, oh man, you really can't see a pedestrian or school kid if they come across there until they're in the roadway. So the effort here is to open up that space so you can see someone. In this case, it's more often a school kid, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, crossing that street so you can slow down and see them before you hit them. It's a systematic improvement. This didn't come out about a complaint or anything. This is something I just noticed. If we do the flashing beacon, it would be in conjunction of this. You still need the stopping distance to see if someone there is there or not. And I did meet with Don last week. Like he said, we talked about options. But we still, it's my professional opinion that we need to go forward with this improvement.
Any questions for our traffic engineer? Alderwoman Evans.
Can you scroll down so we can actually see the proposed no parking zone?
Derek, can you scroll down?
Something. So it's just that particular section, right? From the painted crosswalk, and how many feet back, like?
So it's about 50 feet, 40, 50 feet back from the crosswalk. There is actually God, can I draw on here? So about 5, 10 feet south of his driveway and going up to the crosswalk, Don actually painted the curb yellow as it would be, as to mark a no parking spot. What we're essentially doing is making that official and then also bumping that down a little bit so we can you can have that increased sight distance.
So it's just a section, it's not the entire street, it's just to increase visibility, so if I'm driving, I can actually see maybe a little person
Yep,
crossing.
and it's solely for that crosswalk. Yep.
Any further questions at this time? Alderman Ross.
Is this like a timed, between 8 and 10 and
We proposed 8 and 4. That's similar to other school
school
areas.
day? Okay.
Stefan, within the timeframes, is some of those signs also have timeframes throughout the year, so it wouldn't be in summer hours during, at a time when the kids aren't there? Is that written into here, or is it just 8 to 4, 12 months of the year?
So it's written in the ordinance, school days.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for our traffic engineer at this time? Alderman Pittner.
Just for clarification, do school days include summer days, or is that school days Monday through Friday? How is that defined?
Don't know.
We'll bring up,
No. Defer to
City
Lance on that
engineer.
one.
Yeah.
Call the old pro. Yeah.
good afternoon, Lance.
Good afternoon, Mayor. So the way that the ordinance reads and how it's consistent throughout the city, it's 8 to 4 p.m. on school days, and school days would mean any day school is in session.
Okay.
So summers, holidays, that wouldn't apply.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Any final questions? Thank you, sir. Take it back to the council. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I met with Don on the property, and I get his concerns. First of all, I guess honestly, Derek, if you could bring that picture back up, it'd be great. Sorry. So again, this crosswalk that you can see on this proposal does lead to a sidewalk that cuts through that neighborhood and will actually bring you out on 24th Street. So it is a highway for kids to get to and from school. This not arising from a complaint, this not arising from, an accident, I think is a testament to Stefan doing his job and noticing a trouble area. And I'm encouraged by that. I want him to be doing that. I want him to be doing his job and trying to identify these things and being proactive versus reactive. I would rather us do this before an accident happens than after. I also get Don's frustration in that people He shared a lot of pictures with me of people blocking his driveway, parking in his driveway to pick up their kids, not obeying, and him not being able to get in or out of his driveway because people blocking their driveway. So I guess I'm going to support this because this is about safety. This is about getting our children to and from school, or our teachers or our pedestrians to and from school safely. It's not an ideal location. You got a school that was built when it was built in a residential neighborhood. You see what Ramstead has and Jim Hill has, for these areas for people to pick up their kids effectively and efficiently. I mean, drive downtown at Central and try to pick up your kids at 3 o'clock. It's a gong show. And it's what we have. It's what we have. So I appreciate Stefan trying to identify these areas and make them safer. But again, I do get Don's frustration that it seems to be he's the only one who's penalized because everyone else can park there whenever they want, and we turn a blind eye to it because they're picking up their kids. I want to make sure that the police department is enforcing these things during the hours that they say they are to be enforced. Just because somebody picking up their kids at 3 o'clock doesn't give them permission to park in these no parking zones. It's defeating the purpose of what we're doing. We're putting these signs in there with a specific time to not be parked in so that our kids are safe and they do get to and from school. And I get it. We have a crosswalk there. Kids are going to run out in the street whenever they want to run out in the street. If they see their parent on the other side, they're going to run out. They're going to dart out again. So again, I'd like to make sure that when we do these, that we are enforcing them. If somebody is parked there at 3 o'clock on a school day when school is in session, that they are asked to move or they are ticketed. We need to do a better job of enforcing these things so that this behavior becomes learned and that people know that they cannot park there. I get it. It's an inconvenience. It's a pain in the butt trying to pick up your kids from Bel Air or some of these other schools. But it's the best. We're doing the best with what we have. So I appreciate Stefan bringing this up. I'm going to support this. But again, I want to make sure that we are enforcing these rules so that we do maintain the safety that we are trying to incorporate with these decisions and with these signs. Otherwise, we're printing up signs, we're putting them up, and we're wasting taxpayer dollars if we're not enforcing those no parking zones. So those are my comments. Those are my thoughts on it. So.
Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can feel Mr. Pfeiffer's pain because I did live on a street that had an elementary school. And I would say for a good 45 minutes on every school day, you couldn't get in or out of our driveway. And it was exactly that reason. It was people picking up their kids and they're a little early and they're just sitting in their car, they're just waiting. I get it. But it's frustrating if you live on that block. So I think we need to have some collaboration with the school district in this attempt as well, that they need to get the message out to parents that just stalling in the street is not okay, and that the potential of being ticketed is certainly there. We understand that kids need to be picked up, but everyone has a role in this, and I think it's important that if your child isn't out, you circle the block and just, keep moving so that we don't have potential log jams, and that the people who do live there have freedom to come in and out of their driveway as they choose.
Further comments? I'll make mine very brief, only because my parents lived right down from the house that Alderwoman Olson used to live in. One aspect that has been successful, because parents do circulate, obviously the kids move on, is direct communication with the principal at that elementary school, at all the elementary schools for those neighbors around there, and that the communication from the school out to all of those parents on a very continual basis for the neighborhood safety, because it's not just the kids, but it can also be damage to property or inconvenience, absolute inconvenience to some of the residents as well. So I would encourage communication to continue with the schools, and I'm going to support this as well, as I look at this as an adjustment, but one that is absolutely in respect to safety. Final comment. Call for comment. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitman?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to our section under action items. 7.1 is to approve a subrecipient agreement with YWCA Minot doing business as Project B. Upon taking ownership of the land that had been acquired for North Broadway Circle by Lutheran Social Services, the city reached out to the three nonprofits to ascertain their continued interest in taking over the project. YWCA Minot doing business as Project B responded affirmatively that they would assume the role as the subrecipient per the terms the city had arranged with Lutheran Social Services. Sufficient information and commitment was demonstrated by the nonprofit to determine it had necessary capabilities and the capacity to complete the Broadway Circle. The recommendation to the full City Council is to approve the two subrecipient agreements with the YWCA Minot doing business as Project B to take over the role, completing the project known as Broadway Circle for both the family homeless shelter and the 17-unit LMI apartment rental building. Look to the council for a motion. Alderman Janser, motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. Second by Alderman Ross. And we have our NDR director here, Mr. John Zakian.
Mayor, just two minor things, in the spirit of maybe not having to talk a lot, which I know is very difficult for me. One is that I would ask that the motion include acknowledgement that there will be minor modifications by the staff to the language in both subrecipient agreements to include a reverter clause in case there were a default or bankruptcy. And again, I should have caught this, and I apologize for not. But, it's a lesson learned from Lutheran Social Services. And then the other thing is just I did want to acknowledge that several of the Alderman Pittner and Alderman Ross had asked that when this be brought back, that I have done a deep dive on assessing the viability of keeping it at this site versus selling it and moving it to another site. And that was attached as a memorandum to this agreement. And for many different reasons, even though the thought may be attractive, it's prudent for us to stay on this site. At least that's my recommendation. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I had done that.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. I would look to the motion maker to include the minor adjustments that would include the reverter clause within the language.
I certainly agree to that.
Does the second agree? Yep. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Zakian as he is at the podium? Alderwoman Evans.
So we've talked about this somewhat, John. Within this subrecipient agreement, will there be the flexibility? I mean, there's been some concerns, myself included, that the shelter particularly will not be fully disabled access. There'll be parts of it that will be. Will there be flexibility for Project B to modify the blueprint or the plans so that we can ensure the entire facility is accessible to the disabled community?
Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, they will have that flexibility. However, if they do modify the designs that have been previously funded, it would have to be done with other funds. We could not. And the reason for that is I think we all share the acute need to make sure that we address ADA requirements. And in fairness to what Lutheran Social Services Housing had done, it is a stipulation in both the agreements, both the LMI rental housing agreement and also in the family homeless shelter agreement, that all requirements and rules and regulations governing ADA access and compliance that are imposed by HUD be followed. And the design does, as you noted, the design does account for ADA access for all the common areas, and apartment design has taken into account the needs of the ADA population, but not all the apartments. I'm sorry, these are not apartments, the homeless shelter units. But yeah, there's always flexibility to do it, yes.
And Ms. Larson, could you just come up and discuss that, like what your vision would be for that, and particularly the clients that you all served, how many identify as disabled?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
So every year on every
Miss-
single giving,
I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. Ms. Larson, if you could just identify yourself
sorry.
and
Oh, yeah.
association.
hey, Liz Larson, longtime listener, first time caller, big fan. Hey, I'm the director of Project B. We are breaking away from YWCA to be a 100% local nonprofit. If you have accountant friends, you know that the IRS is slammed right now, so that paperwork is taking a bit of time. So to answer the question, about 80 to 85% of our clients in any given year identify as having a disability. This could mean anything from addiction, mental health disorder, but we have had clients in wheelchairs, which was a problem with our women's shelter when our shelter was in the basement, and being built in the 50s, we didn't think to build a elevator. So for me personally, coming from the program side, social work is my thing. That 80 to 85% is the people that we're serving, and we have an extensive wait list right now, and there's no shelter in Williston. There's a shelter in Bismarck. There's one like up in Belcourt that's trying to start up, but Grand Forks and Fargo is it. So if you think of us being here in Minot, it's not just Minot that we're serving, and so the 80 to 85%, we need to be thinking of them. And so moving forward, I know my board president and I have had extensive conversations about this. It's important for us that the entire shelter is 100% accessible.
And do you feel confident that the subrecipient agreement that you and your board will be signing would allow you that flexibility to do that and then come back to us if there's adjustments in the cost estimates?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we just kind of need to get this going and get the bids so we can hear from the professionals, because I did not go to school for construction management. So I'm not sure on estimates, and I know cost and labor is doing weird things right now.
Yep.
So I'd like to just find out from the professionals how much this is going to cost and what our adjustments are going to cost.
Great. Well, I'm very appreciative of Project B stepping up and, taking on this huge, important project for the city. And I think all of us look forward to helping you and your board get this thing going so we can start serving the families experiencing homelessness in Minot. So thank you for.
So needed right now.
Yes, it is.
Come take a tour, all of you, and everybody listening on Facebook. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Ms. Larson at this time? Thank you.
All right.
I caught the quick little point that also Mr. Zakian stood up to, so please, John, go ahead.
Well, one thing I do want to point out so that there's no confusion. This is a family homeless shelter. It is mandatory that it be a family homeless shelter. That is a condition of the grant. So within the population, if members of a family are certainly having disability needs, the intent of the shelter is to address them, but this is not for individuals or non-families. This is only, just so the public understands, this is purely a unrestricted, full family shelter, but it definitely can have an ADA compliant component.
Thank you. Alderman Ross.
Mr. Zakian, John, just one statement here. Sufficient information and commitment was demonstrated by the nonprofit to determine it had necessary capabilities and capacity to complete the project, the Broadway Circle. Talk a little bit about that. What makes them stand out? I'm concerned it concerns me that we have the right group doing it. Nothing against the group that's stepping up, but I want to know more about their abilities to take this and move it forward and succeed in the future.
Mr. Zakian.
Mayor Sidmer, Alderman Ross, that is a perfectly appropriate question. And actually, it is a requirement under the HUD rules that even though we do not have to do competitive bids with subrecipients, that I, as the grant administrator, need to do due diligence to make sure that if a nonprofit is going to take on a project, they have the capabilities and capacities to do that. One of the key requirements for this particular project, which had also been the requirement that had been imposed upon Lutheran Social Services Housing, had been to provide us with a financial plan that not only showed the ability to carry out the projects that are spelled out in these two agreements, but also to, once the buildings are constructed, to operate the property. So actually, what was a critical element was an operational plan that showed the sustainability of maintaining these properties, both as a family homeless shelter and also as a 17-unit LMI rental housing. And they have done that. They passed that now. I mean, I don't mean to be cryptic, but so did Lutheran Social Services. And then they went bankrupt. We're never absolutely certain, but I am comfortable recommending them today. I would also point out, because I think it's a subset to your question, we did reach out. There had been originally 3 nonprofits that had expressed an interest in picking this up. I did reach out to them several times. One was non-responsive. One did respond, but would only do this in the form of a developer agreement, which is not a form or a format that would work under this, and they would not take on the role and responsibility of taking on the operational responsibilities once the facility was built. So the only one that did step up and respond favorably, and then after several meetings with them and giving me the operational plan, passed the bar of the likelihood of them being successful, was the YWCA, now known as Project B.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Zakian? Alderwoman Evans.
Can Ms. Larson come back out?
Let's find out if there's any more questions for Mr.
Oh.
Zakian first. Okay, thank you, Mr. Zakian.
So just as a follow-up to Alderman Ross's, give us the 1 minute why Project B is the organization to take this project on and succeed with it.
Okay.
Ms. Larson.
So when we changed our name, we did not just change our name, we changed our culture and our staffing structure. We are known as the oldest nonprofit here in Minot, and part of that might have been a little bit of luck that we've lasted over the years, but we've really taken a deep dive at what we're doing, talking to our board and making sure that they're here for the right reasons, making sure that we are all working towards our mission. And on the staffing side, I have changed everything when I became the director, because I've been with the organization over 2 years now. Became the director in October, November of this last year. We changed everything that we did. Instead of just being in crisis mode, I hired a development director, and working with Shelby Waters, my board president, who's very development heavy with her career, just making sure that we're doing things right, really taking the advice of some folks like Jason Zimmerman with the Community Foundation, of making sure that we have money in reserves, just preparing for our future. And we've made a lot of big changes. We were awarded some capacity building grants from some of our larger funders. And so that allowed us to get more staff. More staff allows us to be better at our job. We've had great outcomes. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love and believe what I do. I could make way more money elsewhere, but I love this job. I love the work that we're doing. We're doing great work. I can say that with confidence, that every single one of my staff members and every single one of my board members works hard for this organization and for our community. Now, breaking up with YWCA USA, every single decision is 100% local. Folks in your community here in Western North Dakota are making the decisions. We're all your neighbors, and we know the needs of Western North Dakota better than anyone. Any other questions?
Any other follow-ups for Ms. Larson? Thank you.
Great.
Discussion on the motion to approve. Any discussion? Alderman Ross.
Just a quick note, I want to thank Gerald Royce. During this process of the discussion of finding a new location and actually having, going through that process. And I just want to publicly thank you, Gerald, for taking the time to educate me, taking me around, showing me the center, the plans, and getting me up to speed. I really appreciate it, and it's refreshing to see a guy who has put his heart into a project like you have for so many years. And I, for one, can't wait to have you cut the ribbon on it. Thank you, Mr.
Please,
Mayor.
Mr. Royce. I think you've spent enough time to this point. We can afford you a couple of minutes at the podium. If you would just identify yourself for the folks at home, though.
I'm Gerald Royce. I represent the Welcome Table in town and have had this project close to my heart in many years, and I appreciate the appreciation, Tom, for making the statements you have. Having said that, I would like to fully endorse Project B as being the operating entity of this project. The reason the Welcome Table did not put forth an interest in doing so is because we are not in the shelter business. This is a shelter project with agreement between other agencies to provide other services. That's where we fully plan to work as a full partner with Project B to facilitate the food pantry and the soup kitchen as part of the project. Integral to the success of the whole operation, and yet we did not feel qualified to be the operator of the shelter. And for that reason, we didn't put forth a project. So thank you for your interest in this. Thank you for supporting Project B going forward. Please know that we're not going to disappear. We'll be front and center working with Liz and her crew to make this thing work the best we can. I think it's a golden opportunity for our city to take use of leverage federal dollars and get a project done that's been needed for a long time. So any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Royce? Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 7.2 on our agenda. Item number, well, this is our 2045 Comprehensive Plan Consultant Selection. The Community Development Department solicited a request for qualifications from the professional land planning firms throughout the country. A committee composing of 3 city staff, Alderman Pittner and Padragula, and the Minor Planning Commissioner, reviewed and ranked the written statements of qualifications from 4 consulting firms. The committee invited 3 firms to interview before the committee in person on July 12th, 2021. Based on the qualifications of the highest-ranking firm, the committee is recommending the SRF Consulting of Bismarck, Fargo, and Minneapolis to perform the services for this project. FRS is teaming with Confluence Area Planning and Design based in Des Moines and Fargo, and Odney, which is based in Bismarck and in Minot.
Make a motion to approve the recommendation?
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderwoman Evans, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Alderwoman Evans.
No discussion, but I just want to thank, the city staff and Paul and Steve and the folks from the Planning Commission who were involved in this. I know it was, another duty that you all did, and so thank you for methodically, doing this and coming up with what I think is going to be a great firm to do this work.
Final call for discussion. Alderman Padragula.
Just a comment. Paul and I served on this committee. We met, we reviewed an extensive pile of materials or proposals from each of these firms, and we spent, 4.5 hours interviewing them with staff. Brian Billingsley did a very good job of organizing it. We ranked them. We interviewed 3 of the 4 firms, and it was very interesting kind of reading through the proposals and interacting with the design teams. Each of them had significant strengths. They had weaknesses, but to me it was very good to hear about all the progressive things that are happening in the planning and development and design fields. It was a very eye-opening set of presentations, made me much more optimistic and positive about the efforts the city is engaged in to beef up that part of our development. Some of these people were remarkably creative. I think all of them really emphasized the need for pedestrian and bicycle access. They spoke about planning in a methodical and organized fashion rather than ad hoc. It made me feel good about what we had done in the past couple of years, and made me very optimistic for the future. And I think we've teamed up with a firm that will do a good job for us, and will help the community again grow and develop in a planned and organized and rational manner. So it was a very, very interesting, very eye-opening, and very productive experience. Thanks for the thanks, too.
Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment that this is maybe the second or maybe third sort of iteration of a comprehensive plan that I've seen since serving on the council. And I know in the past, when we have hired a consultant to do this kind of work, you know, sometimes they're from Minneapolis or some place distant, and indeed, you know, they come with ideas or approaches that you know, have worked in other places, but they also need to have a good sense of what works here in Minot and what works in North Dakota. And so I'm pleased to see that there appears to be some linkages within this construct of folks who are familiar with, you know, not only Minot, but our region. And so I'm appreciative of that, and I hope that this turns out well.
Alderman Ross, did you have your hand?
Just a question to either Paul or Dr. Padragula. Was there a local bid put in for this, or a proposal by a local firm, or just,
Alderman-
I mean, just for information?
Alderman Pittner.
Not for the, obviously, not from the ones writing the comprehensive plan. There wasn't a local, but more so for the outreach, I guess. I'll look to Brian. Houston Engineering was part of one, but Odney is doing the outreach, the public input gathering and whatnot for this project.
Community Development Director, Mr. Brian Billingsley.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Ross, to answer your question, the three firms that we interviewed all were from out of the area, the Minot area. The land planners were from the firm we're selecting, they're out of Bismarck and Fargo primarily. Another firm, Stantec, is based out of Minneapolis. They did have a sub-consultant, Houston Engineering, to do some of the planning and engineering work as well. And then the third firm was from the Omaha, Nebraska area, and they didn't have any local assistance on their team whatsoever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I'll just kind of reiterate and regurgitate some of the thoughts that have already been shared. Thanks to Brian and other staff members that sat in on this, asked some really good questions, brought some really great perspective. Again, to reiterate Alderman Padragula's comments, that again, I'm encouraged about the planning and the efforts that have been put in the past, and I'm encouraged by not only some of the work that we put in the past and some of the good things we've done in the past, but some of the challenges that we're faced with moving forward, and some of the things that will be tackled with this, whether it be incorporation of flood control, Trinity possibly vacating a number of buildings downtown. I mean, all of these things were brought to the attention. The consultants were all aware of these items and were very thoughtful in their approach to this. I really don't think we could have picked a bad firm with the interviews that we had. It was very close. There was a lot of great deliberation on who to select. So again, I was encouraged by the team that we're selecting and all of the other ones that submitted. And again, I look forward to this being a roadmap for our community moving forward.
Alderman Padragula.
One of the things I wanted to mention too is that we weighed very heavily the ability of these firms to get input locally. In terms of focus groups, in terms of surveys, and they described some very innovative and creative ways of gauging and gathering public input, doing random surveys from cell phones, getting out on the internet, social media, et cetera, et cetera. And they're also going to have meetings with so-called stakeholders, or not so-called community leaders and stakeholders and various interested groups like that. One of the directions we gave them very, very specifically was that we want a lot of public input, and we want it from lots of different kinds of people, not just the, well, put it this way, a lot of different people and a lot of different diverse groups. And I think Paul and I felt very comfortable about that. So there will be an opportunity as this plan is developed for all members of the community to participate in many different ways, live, virtually, through social media, whatever. And I would encourage that participation. This really will be a better plan the more input we have. And that was a very important thing for us.
Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve the recommendations that are before us. Please call the roll.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to 7.3. This is the legislative updates. The 67 North Dakota Legislative Assembly made several amendments to the state law concerning alcohol beverages, licenses, tobacco, shoplifting, and possession of weapons. City Attorney's Office drafted the attached ordinances to incorporate the amendments made by several House and Senate bills into the city's Code of Ordinances. The recommendation to the City Council was to approve on first reading the attached ordinances relating to alcohol beverages, licenses, tobacco, shoplifting, and possession of weapons.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Final call. Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 7.4 is the American Rescue Act plan. The American Rescue Plan Act, signed by President Biden on March 11, 2021, provides for the distribution of federal fiscal recovery funds to the state, tribal governments, metropolitan cities, counties, and non-entitlement units, the NEUs of local governments, which generally have populations below 50,000 people. Funding allocations for state, tribal governments, metropolitan cities, and counties are received direct from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The funding allocations for the NEUs, such as the cities in North Dakota, is provided from the U.S. Department of Treasury to the state, and then the state must allocate the funding to the eligible NEU cities based on their population. The estimated allocation to the city of Minot is $7,439,371.75, and the use of these funds is limited to specific infrastructure projects or to offset revenue losses due to COVID-19 pandemic. City needs to complete the necessary application and paperwork to receive such funding. The recommendations to the council was to approve the application for the ARPA funding and authorize the finance director to sign the necessary paperwork.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Alderwoman Evans.
I have a question. Maybe Mr. Stewart can answer it. So if this is for the application, if we were to get that, would it come back to council to decide what infrastructure projects and under the appropriate uses of the funding it would be spent on? What would that look like?
Finance Director, Mr. David Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, it would have to come back to council. That money needs to be appropriated to be spent, so we would have to do that. I was on a call last week, and it's kind of varies amongst cities how they intend to handle this. We do anticipate some of this funding may be available yet in 2021, but there isn't a firm date on when we'll expect that. So we'll have to bring it back to council for approval to appropriate the funding to spend it.
Great. Thank you.
Dave, that would come in a form of a budget amendment like all other expenditures, correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
All right. Alderman Janser, do you have a question for our Finance Director?
Yes. David, it's an awfully precise number. Is there a formula, or, we're down to 35 cents or whatever? I mean, can you identify what the methodology was briefly?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, you're correct. It is a precise estimate, I guess. But I believe that throughout all of the paperwork or documentations, they refer to it as an estimate. It's based on population, a number of different items. We are not a non-entitlement unit, so our calculation is a little bit different than if we were an entitlement city. So again, it's primarily on population and if we're a regional hub, so to speak. So that's the information that was given to us. We're told that money will come in 2 tranches of funding, but again, we don't know exactly for certain when that'll happen.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our Finance Director? Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you. So for as long as I've been up here, we've been shooting to be over 50,000. Like we want to be over 50,000 and now we don't want to be, right? Or would it be a benefit if we were over 50,000 and an entitlement city? Would that make a difference in any of this?
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Olson, it would make a difference. The calculation is slightly different, and some of the entitlement cities have already received some funding. So exactly what difference that would make in this case, we don't really know, but it probably would have sped up our process a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up questions? Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Any discussion on the motion? Last call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Quadrigula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. The final item in our action items is 7.5. This is the 2022 preliminary budget. The recommendation before the City Council is to adopt the 2022 preliminary budget for the City of Minot. I do believe we have a presentation from our city manager prior to a motion. Good evening again, Mr. Stewart.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. We've been working a long time on this here, and I think we're anxious to get this process moving further forward and then hopefully move on to some other things. But it's an important process, and I hope we have a lot of the public listening online or at least watching the videos later. This budget is twofold. The action tonight is the preliminary budget proposal, which is required by state law, which offers for opportunity for transparency and engagement by the public to be informed about what budget we're proposing and for consideration. And so this will meet that obligation tonight, but also to hopefully help educate the public on how governance works, how the budget process works, and those types of things. And so that's kind of the intent of the budget process tonight. This is just the first step. I will say that this by no means is the final budget. We still have a lot of work to do and need input from you as the council, as well as the public that have any suggestions or concerns or issues. There is still time to work and change, and staff understands that and is acceptable and amenable to that going forward. So here's what we're going to highlight this evening on some topic highlights. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2022 mill levy impacts, a little bit on housing evaluations, how that impacts the budget, total budget, some of the major drivers and issues and concerns and effects that were taken into consideration through the budget process by staff, and then impacts on rates and fees, and then ultimately workforce, meaning organizational asks budgetarily for the organization of the City of Minot going forward. So before we get too far into it, though, this may be the first time the public has seen this. So as the council is aware, about a month and a half ago or so, the council convened in a facilitated meeting with a facilitator, and out of that meeting came some of your aspirations and values for the community and the organization going forward. And staff has taken these aspirations into account as we've tried to bring forward a recommended preliminary budget. And so we're looking at how we can make the community and the organization more dynamic and prosperous, resilient and prepared, safe and welcoming, excellent and connected. And as I talked previously in some of the previous city manager reports over the last couple meetings, staff is working on how we can integrate this more fully into our processes, our decision-making, not just in policy and process, but also visually here in the council chambers and throughout the organization. But just wanted to put this as a precursor out there as what to refer back to as we make decisions with regard to the budget and how they help us accomplish these aspirations going forward. So let's talk a little bit about what drives the budget. And I thought it was important first here to talk a little bit. So the numbers we're going to go through are talking about the full comprehensive budget, of which a small portion of that is the mill levy, or what we often refer to as the general fund budget. But we have several other budgets as well that we often call enterprise funds. That would be water and sewer and different funds like that. Those are all consolidated in the full budget numbers, but hopefully the public will understand that as we focus on certain things that is often common for them to focus on, and when we're looking at numbers and changes, not all of that is supported by the mill levy, and we'll go into more detail on that here as we go forward. So to give a brief breakdown of some of the revenue impacts, this slide is designed to show you where all the city draws its revenue from in order to support operations and services that we provide. It's a mix of property tax, sales tax collections, there's some other taxes, there's licensing and permits. Intergovernmental would be any type of funding we get from state or federal government. There's some charges for services, fines and forfeitures, et cetera. All those come together to provide the revenues needed to provide services and operations to meet the expectations of the community as a good local government. Next slide, we just wanted to highlight here, because I know that we're going to be talking extensively here about the mill levy here in a minute, but only about 15% of our total revenue comes from property tax. Now, $26.5 million is a lot of money, but when you look at the overall budget of the city, it's a very small portion of what we operate on. In addition, your property taxes, the city is just a small portion of the property taxes that get paid. There are other entities within our community that also have authority to assess a mill levy, such as the school district and the park district and some of those that also support their operations through property tax. And the city itself is just one small portion of your overall property tax bill. So total budget in 2022, staff is proposing almost $176 million budget. Right now, what we have is an ask of a mill levy of $123.57, which generates that $26.5 million that we just talked about on the previous slide. I would like to point out here that that's a pretty large return on investment when you're talking $176 million, and we're only asking the taxpayers for $26.5 million in property tax to help support those operations. Now, obviously, there are other revenue streams there that the community and the citizens help contribute to and pave towards, but very little of your operational costs are supported through the property tax. The previous budget, by way of comparison, is $143.5 million, or a mill levy of $121.29, or $25.8 million in revenues. So you have about a 22% increase in overall proposed budget. That's the difference of the 143.5 versus the 175.9. And we're going to go to a little bit of detail here of what creates those changes. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the difference on the mill levy. If you will recall, it was back in February 2021, staff came to council for a budget amendment. And what happened with that is when the budget was submitted and proposed last year, there was a difference in interpretation of the formula on how that's calculated and provided in conjunction with homestead credits and veterans credits and those types of things. And I have another slide here in a minute to talk about that. But that change was not from the city. That was an interpretation change by the state, applied by the county in going forward. And so pretty much all of this mill levy change is basically an adjustment and a change to that new interpretation. Staff has made a significant effort to try and keep the mill levy the same as it was last time. And the reason we are doing that is, as was reported in the paper here recently and is probably receiving a lot of community conversation, is the future ask of the school district with regards to a funding for a second high school. And as I mentioned before, we're not the only entity within the community that assesses property tax, but we also understand that tax burden of all entities comes together and affects individual constituents of our community. It all comes out of the same pocket. so to speak. And staff understands that. I believe the council understands that. And so we've made a concerted effort to try and not increase the city's property tax ask this year in an effort to help be supportive of the school district's ask, because we believe that is a important development for our community to help it grow and thrive and move forward positively for the foreseeable future. Now, in a minute, when I show you the next slide, I mean, when I showed you the slide before, there was a 2 mil increase here, and I'm going to go and explain it. So it doesn't look like we've accomplished that, but in reality, we are really trying to accomplish a net no increase to the property tax levy. And do I have a slide on here that talks about that? No, I don't. I thought I did. So let me explain a little bit about the state's interpretation of that here. In essence, as I understand it, and how it's been explained to me, is previously the city would account for those homestead credits and those tax credits that get reimbursed by the state. We would account for those. We would understand the total amount that we would need in property tax revenue. We would then subtract out what we anticipated and estimated would be the credits that we would receive from the state, and we would ask for that net value. And so let's say we asked for 26 million, we expected 500,000 in credits. We knew we were getting 26.5 million, but we only asked for 26 million. And that was typically the way that was formulated and done. Last year, and this had about a $400,000 impact to us last year, that got flipped, and we're now being told to ask for the gross amount we're asking for, and then the state would apply their credit to that gross amount. So when we ask for 26 million, if we needed 26.5 million, in essence what they're saying is if you need 26.5 million, ask for 26.5 million. The state will then come in with 500,000. You still get the 26.5 million, but when you as the city make that request, you need to ask for the gross amount, not the net amount. And we had previously been asking for the net amount, and that changed last year. And so a lot of this mill levy increase that is proposed here is still trying to keep that revenue the same, but abiding by the state's new interpretation where we're asking for the gross amount. But at the end of the day, the state will put in its credits, and that levy will actually come down. And so when it comes down to the bill paid for by the citizen, that should be decreased. Any questions on the mill levy at this point? Because this is kind of an important piece. And again, I want to reemphasize again, staff is doing what it can to not increase the property tax ask of the city of Minot to the community, because we believe that the most pressing investment that this community can make with their taxpayer dollars right now would be favorable consideration of the school district's ask and the impacts that will have on our community, both in quality of life, but also in economic development for the future. Any questions on mill levy?
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Harold, could you just explain that timeline, I guess, a little bit on asking for, and then the state stepping in to cover that gap? Are people going to receive their bills and pay a higher mill like we saw in the slide, and then?
My understanding is, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that would be credited at their bill. And we're actually working with trying to make that very clear on the bill when that comes out. So let's say that your bill is $1,500, but you have a $250 credit. You would be paying $1,250 because that credit is then applied.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Alderman Patagula.
A comment more. I'm intrigued by your explanation that you're wanting to keep the mill levy low to accommodate the needs of another governing body. This is the first time I recall that being said publicly, and I think proudly, and I think with foresight. I agree with you that the schools are a major part of our quality of life and work in tandem with what we do. I reserve final judgment on the proposal, but I think this is a very noteworthy thing that you're proposing, the reasoning for that, and I think it looks at our needs as a community holistically, not just in terms of the city or the park board or the schools as individual entities, but as a whole community. And that's very appealing to me at this point. Thank you for having that courage.
No, I appreciate that. And again, ever since I've interviewed and gotten to this point, I keep sounding like a broken record saying that we're stronger together than we are individually. And again, we have to understand that whether we're the county or the school district or the parks district or the city, at the end of the day, we're governing bodies and we all receive our funds out of the same mechanisms. And I agree that the holistic approach is important. At the end of the day, my job is to represent the city and help you do what you need to do within the realm of your responsibilities to make sure that we're providing the services that we're expected to provide in the best way that we possibly can. But at the same time, we need to take into account impacts of all community needs, and some of those we don't have direct control over, but we do have an impact on it based on how we conduct our business and our decisions. So with that being said, I also want to talk too about mill levy, and that is obviously, the city has increased its mill levy significantly over the last several years, and there's only a certain amount of time and aptitude that you can do that. And I think staff recognizes that as well. And again, we're doing our best to make do with the revenues that the constituency, the citizens have already given us, as opposed to keep coming back to the well and asking for more and more. So let's get into a little bit more to the nuts and bolts of the budget and what's included in here. Obviously, some big commitments that you as a governing body in conjunction with the citizens of the community have been talking about for some time and been making some significant positive progress on are flood control, NAWS. We continue to move those in accordance with plan and in cooperation with federal and state partners in getting some of these projects done. So these are included in here. Another thing is we have the good fortune of being very healthy when it comes to reserves, and we're trying to, as staff, do a better job of putting that money to work on behalf of the taxpayers. And so a lot of this budget and in balancing this has been taken from trying to use some of the good work that your city staff have done over the last year. Even though you gave them budget authority to spend money, they did not spend all the money you gave them authority to do, to the tune of probably $2.5 to $2.9 million that you told them they could spend and they didn't. And we've rolled that over, and we're trying to use that money to help balance our needs this year as opposed to coming in and asking for more. So we're looking at using close to $22.1 million in reserves. That's a combination of state or federal funding that's already been designated to us and given to us that we've already received, and we've put in restricted reserve, as well as some other reserves that the city has individually from previous budgets. So flood control budget, we expect construction to begin of phase M15, and increasing capital flood control by $8.1 million. A lot of that funding comes again from state and federal funds. We have airport infrastructure improvements in here, which includes $7 million for stormwater and drainage improvement. A lot of that is federally funded. This has some of the best funding available for governments. It's probably about 90% eligibility with federal government, and opportunity to get some great projects done without your local taxpayers contributing all of the funding to be able to do that. We have street improvements and city operations, where we're using $2.97 million of reserves. That $2.97 million again comes over from last year's budget of money that was allocated and approved by the council that was not spent in projects. And so we're trying to use that for one-time costs. We're trying not to use that to fund ongoing costs, such as new positions and those types of things. Those are going into funding maintenance and operational expenses that are typically one-time costs. We're also trying to make significant progress, and we talked a little bit this at the last council meeting with regards to recycling. So the sanitation budget is up $6.2 million in anticipation of building landfill transfer station and entrance. And then water and sewer, we have water, sewer, and storm sewer projects, an increase of about $2.9 million due to the Northwest Minot water replacement infrastructure projects going forward. Again, this is a mix of enterprise funds and general fund, and most all of these are non-general fund projects. In other words, your property tax mill levy is not supporting a lot of these projects. A lot of these projects are supported through state or federal funding or enterprise funds that stand alone on their own. So a little bit about property evaluation. We do anticipate about a 1.05% increase in property valuation. So about 212.5 million up to 214.7.8. And a lot of that this isn't something that we as city staff have a lot of control over. A lot of this comes back from the demand and the value of property within your community. Housing stock is short supply right now. That drives prices up, which also drives valuation up. And that will probably continue to go up, especially as labor and cost of materials continue to go up. It becomes more expensive to build homes. And if your property, whether it's commercial or residential property, continues to be in short supply, those property values will continue to go up. So mill levy impact, we talked about the $123.57 impact. So if you took a median home value, which is about $187,000, that would translate into a little over $1,000 a year, or about $4, and that's a $4.79 per month increase, or about $50 a year increase is what represents that mill levy change. Again, that is driven by not so much as new operational income to the city, as much as changing how we submit that to the county and the state in our mill levy request going forward. At the end of the day, if it becomes a public perception issue and you want to keep the mill levy at the 121, staff will do its work, but that would require staff to cut an additional about $400,000 of expenditures that are proposed. And we've already been through a lot of cutting and those types of things to get to this point. We can continue to do some more of that, and we'll do that. But just want the council and the community to understand the impacts of that ask going forward. Some additional revenue areas that we always evaluate and consider through the budget process would be rates and fees. There are some increases and some changes here that we wanted to highlight, and I'll go through each of these specifically here over the next slides. Sewer rates, there'll be a slight increase in sewer and storm sewer rates. Airport fees, see some adjustment in rent and landing fees, and then cemetery rates. And a lot of these are done in conjunction with studies, comparisons, et cetera. So first one would be sewer rates and stormwater. And most of that change is coming out in the sewer flat rate and a little bit in the usage rate. And you can see some comparisons there about what those changes would meet on an average 1,200 cubic feet of water usage of a residential user here, about $2.15 difference going forward. And then also under the storm, where's the other change? We have the sewer category, residential duplex, triplex, and fourplex category change from 704 to 739, about 35-cent change. And then apartment, commercial, and government, that flat rate is proposed to change by 35 cents. And then the usage fee to change by 17 cents per 100 cubic feet. Those are the changes with regards to sewer and storm sewer. Airport changes, again, coming in with some rental fees and landing fees and those types of things, pretty minimal. First one is terminal airline rent and per user fees going from $16.80 to $17.34 per square foot. There's actually a decrease in landing fees from $2.50 to $2.35, and then the ARF fees going from 39 cents to 54 cents. There were some proposed changes in parking fees going to a more hourly rate as opposed to just trying to simplify that one down. And that was I believe that was at the recommendation of our new parking consultants and staff. Changes in cemetery fees, mainly being the adult interment fees, or is where you see the significant changes from $675 to $725 and $825. Earn fees from $500 to $550, depending on what season and what time of day they're doing the interment. And again, those are to keep up and be consistent with revenue needs, but also being consistent and comparable to other cemeteries within the region. So before I talk about position requests, any questions up to this point as far as rates, revenues, intentions?
Any questions for the city manager at this time yet? If not, I'm sure we'll have plenty of time over the next week or several weeks to develop some.
We'll have as many
thank you.
meetings as you need to talk about this and get a budget that you're comfortable with. So with that, we'll finish out a little bit here with changes in personnel costs that we're requesting. We have a lot of departments that have significant needs. I think we started this process with, I think it was 24 new positions requested. This has been cut down to 18 at this point. And actually, if you look in on the document that was provided to you, I think it's page 12, will give you a more in-depth summary here of the different positions funded. This represents about $882,000 of new funding requests for new positions to help meet the needs of service delivery of the city. This is a big ask. I don't know a whole lot of organizations of this size that typically add 18 new positions all at once, and I would probably venture to guess that this is probably the biggest request that staff has made to council over the last several years. But again, as we talk about delivering on those 4 aspirations that we just talked about, and given some of the demands and the needs that we have in the organization, these are some asks that we would like to have considered by the council and the public going forward. So a few different police positions. One would be for a public information officer. Another one would be for a computer forensics technician, and then another administrative clerk. 2 more for dispatch. We continue to have difficulty fully staffing dispatch and meeting the call volume and demands. Dispatch is one that is cost shared, so the city doesn't pay 100% of the cost for these. This is shared with the 911 and the county. I believe we pay 65% and the county pays 35% of those positions. There's one additional fire captain position here that would mainly help focus on and oversee training for our department, make sure that proper training is being delivered and given and documented properly. There's an ask for a plumbing inspection position that currently is shared duties with an electrical inspector, and we have enough demand now with both electric and plumbing inspections that it's becoming difficult to meet those needs. And so we are asking for a plumbing inspector. There's a GIS technician as we continue to transition to electronic formats and those types of things. GIS is a critical component of that. This position is actually to be paid for almost completely by enterprise fund. So this is not a mill levy request. Staff has worked to have this funded because we have enough need to keep our infrastructure GIS maps up to date that it warrants a position to itself. And that position would be paid for through the enterprise funds that are affected by that. We have a request for, on here it says a city shop position, but that's a mechanic. Our staff does a great job of maintaining all city equipment. That's trucks, small engines. Pretty much if it has a motor and runs, our city staff work as best they can to maintain that and save the taxpayers money to do that. But that workload has risen to a point that while our staff does a good job of doing that, we can't quite get to everything that we need to in the time that we need to do the preventative maintenance, et cetera. And a new mechanic position is needed. There are two street positions being asked for, heavy equipment operators. Currently, this is shared with our stormwater positions, and so they help do both. But with all the stormwater infrastructure coming on board, it increases the demand for maintenance and service and those types of things. And we don't feel that we can continue to split that, and it now warrants need to have more dedicated positions for those going forward. So having two heavy equipment operators dedicated to the street department, and that would allow our two current ones that are actually within our stormwater department to focus on stormwater responsibilities only and not be required to help with streets anymore. We have two property maintenance requests. This mainly comes to with building a new city hall downtown. We're adding a whole new structure and needs of maintenance for property. And we're not confident that we can continue to do that adequately with our current staff. And so those two property maintenance workers would be dedicated to the new city hall once it opens. The landfill position is a new recycling coordinator position. Again, as we move forward with laying out recycling and how that works and effectively and efficiently within our community and those types of things, we believe it would be helpful to have someone dedicated specifically to that. And it's important to bring them on board to help us make sure that we design and consider all needs going forward. Water plant supervisor, we've done a lot of investment in expanding our water treatment facilities and those types of things. We have not added any new positions in the foreseeable past. And we believe it's time for two additional positions there. One is a supervisory position and then one as a utility operator to help with the organizational structure and maintenance of our new facilities that are coming on board with the new water treatment facilities, and then with NAS coming on as well with those responsibilities. And then two transit positions. This primarily goes to with the new hospital coming on board. We don't have any current bus routes that serve the southwest section of Minot. And we anticipate significant increase in demand for that with the new hospital opening and development continuing to grow in southwest Minot. And so we are in, that will require a complete, basically restructure, rerouting of all of our routes throughout town to make sure those are efficient and effective. And so we're asking for two new bus driver positions there. And those two positions are also funded through federal and state dollars. So that's not 100% on the city's budget to pay for that. We have some revenues that come in, and we are making a request in our application with our federal funding on that to help cover the costs of those two new positions. There's significantly more needs throughout the organization, but these are the ones that rose to the top through the management team as we discussed the needs of the organization collectively and holistically that we all felt and agreed needed to be considered strongly for within our current financing restraints. I will say that as you look at, and there's just a highlight there of which positions are mill levy. So when we go back to that mill levy conversation, I guess to put it lightly, if the directive of the community and the council is to go and and keep that mill levy completely flat, in essence, foregoing the $400,000 with the change in the state's interpretation of that. If we were to strictly keep the mill levy the same, we would basically lose $400,000 in funding. Those mill levy funded positions there that you see would be the first ones for consideration for removal from the budget. In the process of going through and trying to balance the budget, there's not a whole lot of fat to trim in the non-personnel sections. There's a cost to turning on the lights every day. We have to have vehicles and equipment for staff to do their jobs. We have to have software, computer technology, tools, instruments to do our jobs. There's only so much that we can cut in those areas. And, probably 75–80% of our operational costs is in people, whether that's wages and benefits. And so when you're talking the amount of reductions that we're talking about, there isn't really any way to do that without affecting people. As we talked about, and I'll get into this a little bit more here in a future slide, we're trying to keep wages and benefits competitive at the same time, and that is our first priority as a management team, is to make sure that our wages are competitive. But if there's room for consideration for new positions, these are the ones that are on the top of our list currently. So let's talk a little bit about challenges here that we've been taking into consideration in trying to balance this budget this year. One is some volatile revenues, that being hub city funding, sales tax. We're coming out of COVID. I think we're optimistic that the Canadian border is going to open up here again soon, and our neighbors to the north can come down and enjoy our community and hopefully spend some money down here. But it's been over a year since they've been down here, right? That has a major financial impact. 2 years. So it has a major financial impact on us. Fortunately, I believe Minot's weathered that fairly well and has proven to be fairly resilient through that process. But we're not seeing we haven't budgeted any sales tax increase. Pretty much the only new revenue that we have that we've budgeted is in that 1% assessed value increase. All other revenues are budgeted pretty much flat. And so that's one of the challenges to take into consideration as we talk about these new positions. These are permanent long-term costs that we're looking at adding in. And the only way that I really give any recommendation on that is we are quickly coming, hopefully, to the end of the road when it comes to NAWS funding, where we'll quickly have the money we need to complete NAWS. You have some sales tax revenue that comes in, that's your community facility funding that it was previously that you've redirected towards NAWS. I would argue that, NAWS and flood mitigation and those types of things are community assets, so I think that was a smart move. Those are community facilities, that's community infrastructure that all the public benefits from. But I think going forward here, the only way I'm really comfortable in adding any of these new position requests is we have to be comfortable that our future revenues are going to adjust in a way that we can continue to afford those positions. I'm not interested in asking for these positions to turn around next year and have to cut positions, which right now, to be honest with you, we're still at a significant risk of, because again, I think we only increased revenue projections by a couple $100,000, and now we have an ask for almost $800,000 in new position costs. And the only way that I could, in good faith, give a recommendation to follow through with that would be is if the council is committed to, once that NAWS obligation is met within the next 2 or 3 years, some of that money needs to come across in tax relief to help support some of our general fund obligations. Now, I do believe, and I don't want to be misinterpreted here, I do believe that a significant portion of that funding needs to go back to community facilities. We've talked about that in some of our meetings and with some of our fellow community leaders that have made that proposal. That was a very beneficial program, and I think that does need to come back to some extent. But unless the council is willing to dedicate some of that funding towards tax relief and coming in to support the general operations of the city, I don't know that we have the revenue projections to support sustainably all of these new position requests. But if the council and the community are willing to make that commitment and understand that, then I'm comfortable that we're in a financial position that we can cover these costs for the next 2 or 3 years until that revenue stream kicks in. But again, sales tax is always volatile. You're never going to change that. This continues to drive home the conversations I've had with the council and the presentations with regards to economic development. If you're going to grow revenues, again, we talked about mill levy and property tax. There's significant concern about increasing mill levies and property tax burden in North Dakota and in Minot specifically. I get that, I understand that. In essence, you're not going to get a lot of revenue growth out of your property tax. I don't think that's politically palatable. I'm not real confident on being super reliant on the federal government or the state to give us funds, so I'm not willing to rely on that. So really the only thing you have left is your sales tax, which again continues to drive home the importance of continuing to be aggressive on economic development, continue to strengthen your position as a regional economic hub for retail and growth, and to try and get that money spent here and stay here for best you can. Because if you're going to meet the needs of your organization for the foreseeable future and grow, you have to have revenue growth from somewhere. And I think your best opportunity for that is sales tax. Yes, Alderman Pinder.
I've got a quick question.
Alderman Bittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Just with the positions that are presented in the budget, like we have, pick out one, recycling coordinator or dispatcher, 6 months, is that salary and benefits prorated for 6 months then?
Yes, they're prorated because basically what staff did is, as we tried to balance the budget, these were needed positions, but we couldn't afford 100% of it. And to be honest with you, realistically, it's unrealistic for us to anticipate that we're going to fill these positions come January 1. So we took a realistic approach to how soon do we think we could fill that position, how soon do we think we need it, and we prorated that back. That helps with this year's budget, but all it does is potentially compound next year's budget, because next year you'll be budgeting 100% of that cost. So, yeah.
I can do the math at home, but do you have a projected value on what that 100% commitment would be on salaries?
I believe the full amount is the $882,000 on page 12, correct?
Yeah, but if it's 100%, it'd be like 1.2 million.
Okay.
So we're kicking the can down the road, about 400,000, not kicking the can, that's the wrong, but we're projecting another 400 to be encumbered next year's budget we are not accounting for in this.
Yeah. And that's not including any step increases or market adjustments or increase in health insurance or any of those types of things that are, and we'll get into some of that here in a minute too, that go into that. That's today's value. That's not tomorrow's value, and those values continue to grow year after year. Any other questions on the positions? Staff will continue to try to be smart with budget. Again, as I talked about, I mean, we're relying on a lot of the due diligence and the great work that your staff have done over the last year of helping carry over $2.9 million. That's what's helping us this year. We're going to continue to need to do that and manage that. In essence, the directive there is, even though it's budgeted, don't spend it just because it's budgeted. If you needed it, it's there. But if you can do without, then do without. And the more that we can carry over, that helps provide the funding for one-time costs in the next year's budget. But to be honest with you, that's only going to buy you a certain amount of time. That's going to get you a few years before that catches up with you. Another big challenge that we had, and this was a last-minute, this was some last-minute information we got probably late last week. Was our healthcare premiums had a double-digit percentage increase, and that had a major impact on our budget this year. That was I think it was a 28% increase in premiums and claims, and a lot of that goes down to, fortunately, the healthcare is working and our employees need it and they use it, but our claim history is we had a bad year in claim history, and that affects how much money you need to put aside to help cover future risks, and that's where that came in from. And so that had a major impact. on our budgeting this year as well. That's something that I do have some experience with. I'll be working with staff to try and find some ways to better manage our health insurance costs to make that more reliable and more sustainable. But there's not a whole lot I can do to help you with this current upcoming fiscal year's budget.
Alderwoman Evans.
The health insurance premiums, that is one of the, I think, the really great benefits we offer to city staff. Does the city pay 100% of the premium for a single, what does that look like for city staff?
Yeah, I believe it's 100% for single. What's our cost share on family?
80% for family and 90% for single plus.
So that's good. I mean, it's very competitive, right? That if, you work for the city, we'll pay 100% of your individual insurance and then help pay for a large portion of your family.
Yes, it's very generous. We'll save that topic for another day.
And I would also look back to 4 years ago, when we were at an 18% turnover rate, and that was one of the efforts to take that exceptional cost down by adjusting on the benefit side of things. So we've also seen what happens when it's not so generous.
A couple of things here in my experience to help manage your healthcare premiums. One is I would highly recommend that we look at what they call as almost a third-party consultant that specializes in the healthcare industry to help you review the numbers that Blue Cross Blue Shield assesses to determine what your rates are. The other thing I would strongly encourage is a very vibrant, healthy employee wellness program. You invest in some incentives and those types of things, but really working with your employees to help manage their claims. And because again, the biggest driver of cost in health insurance is your claims, and some of those are manageable.
Alderman Ross, you had a question.
Yeah, Mr. City Manager Harold, did you say 28%, or I'm seeing 38% in the book?
I was told it was a 28% increase.
What are we talking
The health insurance
Health
increase
insurance.
this year.
about? Oh, okay.
38.6% is what it shows in the budget.
Get our finance director to perhaps come up and shed some light.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Ross, if you're just looking at the dollars to dollars comparison, if we have empty positions, we budget them to be at the most expensive plan, which is a family plan. We have the additional positions that are coming on that are budgeted for those family plans as well. So the recommended premium increase is 28%, but the actual number in there due to those other factors is slightly more than that.
Thank you, Dave. Just
Continue.
a follow-up then. And I know you mentioned that it has to deal with claims, but I mean, I'm kind of getting a feeling that this was just kind of a shot in the back of the head by Blue Cross Blue Shield. I mean, what explanation did they give? And as a follow-up, I mean, never mind the follow-up, just answer that question.
Well, there's two components to this. One is that there was an increase last year that the city absorbed. And so that's added into this increase. So you're absorbing last year's and this year's at the same time because the city, as an employer, paid 100% of that. We didn't pass any of that cost on to the employees. So you're going to charge two things to your employees, the premium cost and then a share of the claims costs as they go forward and meet their deductible and those types of things. Those two come together. And last year, the city absorbed 100% of that cost without passing on to the employees, and now we've got to adjust that this year.
You already answered the follow-up. That's why.
Okay.
Alderwoman Evans?
So would it be possible, Harold, to put in the budget then for 2021, this consultant you're talking about, right, to come in and really do a deep dive into, what we're what we're getting for our buck, if there's better policies out there. Particularly what concerns me about one of our policies is, state and county employees, remaining competitive, but state and county employees get 100% of their family plan covered and city employees don't. And, maybe a consultant not only could come in and, take a look at, that, but like how we could, do better for the same, amount of money or a little bit more. What are your thoughts on adding that into the budget? The consultant, I mean.
Well, it's definitely something that I'll be working with HR and finance to work
I would like
on
to
and
just see that, what
figure
that would
that
look
out.
like. Just, if there's an opportunity to get better health insurance for the staff at a better price or more coverage or less deductibles or a better plan, let's try and do that.
Yeah.
Mr. City Manager, if I may, I'm not going to dive too deep into the world that I deal with on a regular basis, but there's very limited options out there when it comes to health insurance. That is the reality. Unless we have a self-funded plan that we work with on the city right now, outside of that, you're looking at Blue Cross Sanford for group policies, which are very much in a different funding mechanism than what we have now. And I'm not a group plan expert by any means, but there's not a lot of great options out there. It just comes down to what the bottom line is, what the entity is willing to pay, whether it's the individual, the family plan with a lower deductible and all of that. So I'm not disagreeing with a consultant at all, but the options out there are very limited in the full scope of reality.
And again, we're not talking necessarily about changing from Blue Cross Blue Shield to somebody else. What we're talking about is someone that reviews the data, knows the trends in the health insurance market, can help keep Blue Cross Blue Shield accountable that we are getting the most effective, efficient premiums that we possibly can, and help us manage our claims history. And again, the biggest area that you can invest in that's going to have the biggest difference is in your employee wellness program, because that's going to drive down your claims history, right? And the healthier you can have that, the more you can keep your healthcare costs in control. And that's what I've been able to do in a couple other communities I've been in previously. But you are a fully self-insured, and so you do take on a lot of that risk, which kind of surprises me with how much this increases. I'm used to seeing these types of increases in a fully insured program, not in a self-insured program. So I'm just saying that there's some work we can do in helping manage our claims history, and a consultant can help us do that more effectively. Help us tailor our employee wellness program to have the largest impact on our most expensive claims that are
Harold, I
preventable.
have 2 air conditioners running in both my ears. Could I have you either pull the microphone up just a little bit, or it almost seems as the audio is getting lower for me. I
Okay.
apologize.
I'm just getting quieter for you. Make sure you're paying attention.
John's just getting older.
Anyway, the intent wasn't to talk a whole lot on health insurance tonight, but I think there are some tactics we can take to improve it a little bit better. But at the end of the day, due to our claims history here over the last couple of years, we need to invest more money to keep that viable and sustainable. That doesn't necessarily translate into changing of co-pays and network and all those types of things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more the behind-the-scenes things. I think there's some things we can do that will keep the employee experience the same, but will help us better manage our risks and our financial stability on the backside. So let's end a little bit where we started, and coming back to the Magic City aspirations and where these reflected or highlighted within the proposed budget that's ahead of you or in front of you. Under dynamic and prosperous, the police, public information officer, the GIS technician, bus drivers, recycling facility, recycling coordinator are all ones that I believe will help have an impact in more dynamic. Plumbing inspector, safe and welcoming. We still have in the budget to proceed with fire station number 5, including an addition of a new fire engine for that station. You have to order those 12 to 18 months in advance. So that time is coming up quickly. We have the City Hall retaining wall. just here on the south side of this building that we're in now. I understand you guys have been talking about that for a couple years. I think our fuse is getting short on that one. Some additional dispatchers that we talked about for safety purposes, and then the computer forensic technician out of the police department are all budgeted items that I believe have impact in improving the safety and more the safety side of the community. And then excellent connected. And again, some of these are listed in multiple places because they have an effect in multiple areas. So police PIO, police administrative clerk, fire captain, the heavy equipment operators, building maintenance staff, and then the pay adjustments for all staff. So right now what we have built in is the market adjustment and a one-step increase for all employees. So one of those is to help keep our wages competitive, and the other one is to reward employees for their commitment and longevity of serving our organization in the community. So budget schedule. Again, this is just a precursor. If the council approves this tonight, we cannot ask for any more money than what's been presented tonight. We can decrease it. We can make cuts and ask for less, but we can't ask for any more than what's here and proposed to you this evening. So I understand that your process is at the next council meeting, there will be council questions and answers for you as the governing body and as also for the public. We need the president's message completed and ready by August 27th, and then your two council meetings next month in September, you'll do first and second reading so we can get it approved and submitted to the county and the state in accordance with state law. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Questions or further questions at this time? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Harold, for the presentation. Well, one quick question. Recapping some of my notes from our workshop here a little ways back in the summer, you'd said that it's recommended for city governments to have about 1/12 of their budget in reserves, or have a reserve of about 1/12 of your budget. And you said our actual was a little bit higher than that, about 3/12. Where do we sit post dipping into reserves? And if you got to get back to me on that.
Well, again, the short answer is that you're still very healthy. I think you're still meeting that. We're meeting all the state requirements, or we're meeting the self-imposed requirements by you as the governing body of what our reserves should be, and we've exceeded that a little bit. Most of the reserves that we've used to balance the budget is the carryover from last year.
Okay.
So we're using the $2.9 million that we added to reserves at the end of the budget year last year, and I don't believe we're using very much of any additional reserves. All the other reserve funding, that 22 point whatever million that was at the beginning, a lot of that is coming from like your NAWS and flood mitigation projects and those types of things that we've already received the money and we've held on to because we haven't been able to spend it yet.
Yep.
Those sit in reserve, and that's what we mean when some of those are being spent out of reserve. So instead of making our reserves continue to grow year after year, we're trying to minimize that out and put that money to work.
One of the immediate questions I'm sure will come up at some point, and while we don't know when that 7-point very specific estimate coming in from the federal government for infrastructure that has very specific use, I'm sure at some point someone is going to ask the question of can any of that money supplement any of the capital improvement or infrastructure projects even within this budget? And would it be responsible to consider that, not knowing the amount, not knowing when, and whether or not that could even fall within a timeline that we would need within our construction cycle?
So my thought on that would be is that pretty much almost all of that money is probably going to go towards infrastructure projects. I can tell you right now, you have more infrastructure needs. That $7.4 million is only going to be a drop in the bucket, but we're going to be assessing some of those projects together as a management team and work on that, for at least for those that are eligible for use of that money. I don't know that we're going to be very effective in documenting any loss of revenue because, again, I believe the city of Minot weathered COVID pretty well, where sales tax revenues stayed pretty flat. So it's going to be hard to argue loss of revenue, so I don't know we're going to have a whole lot in that. But I can tell you right now, just in, I mean, we've talked previously, based off of the water hydrant project, that in the valley, with all that cast iron pipe we have in there, we could easily spend $150 million just on that alone. 7.4 million is not going to go. I mean, we can make some progress. We can do a little bit. Well, we can make that money go as far as we can, but you have way more infrastructure needs that can probably be funded than this money is going to be able to accomplish.
Thank you, Harold. That was the answer I was looking for. Any other questions at this time? We will have a couple of more cracks at this as well. Alderwoman Evans.
Just so the public knows who is where, so they can give input to us and come on August 16th. Will both your presentation and the preliminary budget be available on the city's website and social media outlets for them to
Yes.
go take a look?
The intention
Okay.
is to put them available on the website tomorrow morning
Okay.
and have those available. And we're always happy to answer any questions. So if any of the public has any questions, they're welcome to contact my office or Dave's office. But as he continues to remind me, this is the city manager recommended budget. So, and then we'll obviously do some news interviews and those types of things.
Great.
I do want, I'd be beholden if I didn't thank staff and the management team for the great work that they've done. This has not been an easy process. They've done a lot of tough decisions to get to this point. We still have a little ways to go, depending on what the appetite of you as the governing body and the community is. But they put in a lot of time and effort over the last several weeks to get us to this point. And yeah, these are some pretty tough decisions, but it's one of the most important processes we go through that has the most impact on our organization and the community. So definitely encourage the community to read through the proposed budget and review through the presentation. And now's the time to provide input if you have any suggestions on how we can do different or do better.
Alderman Ross.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we approve the budget,
Approve the preliminary budget?
preliminary budget.
Thank you. Motion by Alderman Ross to approve the preliminary budget. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Evans. Any other questions for our city manager at this time? Alderwoman Evans.
Just a general question, just feedback. So did you and the department heads find it helpful to have the aspirations that we came up with at the retreat in helping develop the priorities for the budget, and just general feedback on that and how that helped or hindered the process?
No, I think it's very, very helpful for us. It's a learning process for us and how to incorporate that better and incorporate it into the culture. But no, I think all of the staff is very appreciative of this direction. In fact, hopefully soon we'll also be rolling out our new organizational mission and values that are built primarily off of these aspirations. And we're working on getting that prepared to roll out organizational wide. And again, we continue to work on how to incorporate that into our processes and our decision-making and presentations and all those types of things. So yes, it was very helpful. Could it be used better and stronger? Yes. We're getting there.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Any discussion on the motion to approve the preliminary budget? Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, I'd like to make some general initial comments. I have 10 things listed, and I'll just cover a few of them because I really haven't had the chance to look through this in detail. I guess the first general comment I'd make is that I think it's good in our budgeting process, we're considering the needs of some of the other parts of the community. Like I said previously, now we're focusing on the schools, giving them a better chance to advocate for the resources they feel that need. I think that's a very important thing we're doing. The second point I'd make now is I think it's important that we are being realistic, finally, about our staff needs. We've been trimming, we've been cutting fat. There's no fat, there hasn't been for years. And I think our staff have been doing more and more with less and less sometimes. So I think the fact we're finally recognizing, at least in your proposal, Harold, what some of those needs really are is a very positive thing. We're facing reality. We may not like the reality, but we're facing it, which is a huge thing. The third comment I'd make is that it's certainly an ambitious budget, particularly in terms of the staff requests. And when I meet with you and And department heads, I'll be paying particular attention to that, in particular why you asked for certain positions and why you didn't, and what the rationale was, what the reasoning was behind that. When we had our lengthy 3 days of budget hearings and tours with staff, I think we received a very good orientation to what they perceive their needs to be. And I think I'll be very curious to hear what senior management, if you will, thought of that, and what the reasoning was behind including some of those and not including others. A lot of positions were asked for that weren't given. And the quality of the reasoning is what I'll be curious about and interested in learning. The only systematic thing that I'm seeing here that concerns me a bit, and maybe it's too early in terms of how we articulated our goals and needs during the retreat meetings a couple months ago, was this issue of making full use of our human resources. I think we're at least identifying the kinds of positions we need to carry out responsibilities that the citizens are asking for from us. But I'd like to see, and I'm going to look at this through this set of lenses of how we're maximizing the use of our staff. We've done some major things in terms of our 2 new software programs that are going to take probably a long time to fully implement. But there are things in the works that are helping people work more efficiently and effectively. And I'd like to see, frankly, a human resources or a human infrastructure improvement plan along with the capital improvements plan. We keep hearing how it's going to cost $300 or $400 million over X number of years to fix all the pipes and stuff. I'd like to see us have that same kind of analysis for making better use of our staff, for giving them the leadership, the training, the educational resources, things like that they need. And I see hints of that here. I see glimmers of that. And that's one thing I'll be very interested in, because our number one resources are people. And I think we're at least recognizing that by saying we need more people and we need them in these focused and targeted areas. So I'm impressed. I can't offer any definitive comments because I haven't studied it, haven't read it, haven't looked for input from people. But I think from my perspective, we're seeing something that's starting to approach what we've talked about behind the scenes and what seems to reflect the reality of day-to-day service delivery. And we'll obviously have to make some compromises in the end. But the tone I hear here from you and the other staff is much more positive, is ambitious, in some ways shows a good deal of courage, and I'm pleased to see that. And I really appreciate the input that staff have given us and the effort they've put in for months now, and the effort you've put in trying to craft these compromises, at the manager's level at least. So it's a very good start, and certainly a lot to chew on.
Any other comments? Alderwoman Olson.
Could we, pardon me, could we return to the schedule just so that citizens are fully aware when they can ask questions, when they can give comments at public meetings? Is it only on the 16th, or is it also at the first reading?
I believe, Alderwoman Olson, typically on the Q&A for council Q&A, that traditionally has been the Q&A for the council on the to the different department heads, and then the regular city council meeting traditionally has been the comments from the public. And I would look to our finance director or our city manager if there are other plans from the typical or traditional schedule.
Mr. Mayor, you are correct. The first reading on September 7th is the public hearing where the public can comment on the budget.
Okay, thank you. I know that sometimes in the past there's been confusion, so now they're fully aware. Thank you.
So September 7th, the first reading, and then the final adoption, which would be the second reading, September 20th. Mr. City Manager.
I agree with that statement with one caveat, and that is this meets the minimum requirements that the state requires you to do. There's nothing that precludes the council that if you want to take more meetings for more public input, you can do so. But this meets the state requirements.
And with that, I think with anybody who is at home listening, that is also an opportunity to reach out to the city manager or any one of us with input or questions as well to find out those answers, and not necessarily waiting for what could be a line or nobody at the podium in an evening. So, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? We have a motion to approve the preliminary budget. Please call the roll.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That is the end of our action item section of our council meeting. This is now number 8, personal appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on any item that is or is not on our agenda for the evening. I would just ask if you do come forward to please state your name and your city of residence. One more time for the call for public or for personal appearances. Seeing none, that takes us to number 9, miscellaneous and discussion items. I just had 2 very short items. First, as I got busy in my report, I forgot to thank Alderwoman Olson for the use of her car. That was the car that was used in the North Dakota State Fair Parade for my wife and I. So, Lisa, thank you very much for lending that out for me for the morning. It was very much appreciated. And then also, I did want to also make point and not make light of it, but there is a specific reason why I'm trying to make a better effort to introduce people as they come to the podium or have them introduce themselves, is we don't have a graphics machine, and oftentimes if I'm rewatching something to verify from a past city council meeting, there's a lot of folks, we know a lot of these people and hear from them every day, but a lot of people at home don't. We've got graphics now. So we'll look to Mr. Hackett, and I don't see the live feed, but that is the reasoning if anybody was wondering, as I chuckled even myself before. Any other items that need for open discussion for the good of the order today? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to rehash on one of the items that we talked about was the litigation with Cypress and the city of Minot and moving that forward. And I just maybe want to call Mr. Zakian maybe to the podium. And we had a discussion last week as far as now that we have control of these assets, moving those assets forward and doing different things with them. And the original plan, I think, was to build housing on top of the parking structures and whatnot. And just maybe I'll ask Mr. Zakian, are we required to do that still, to put housing on top of those structures?
Mr. Zakian.
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Pittner, no.
And the reason I bring that up, just so that the public's aware and this council is aware that we're not obligated to do that portion of it. We have attacked LMI housing and some of those obligations through other. This is a time, I think, to be creative, to think outside the box, to partner with other entities around, whether it be the schools, the park board, and come up with something that can be unique to the city and not just be housing down or whatever it is, or a roof. I mean, again, we don't have to build anything as well, but we have assets there. We can move them forward. We can invest and make that an attraction for our city. So again, I don't want us to get blinders on and focus on housing on top of these or apartments or whatnot. I want us to be creative and if we can fill a community need or in those spaces, I want to be able to do that. So again, it's a call to the public input. These are your buildings, City of Minot residents. I just want to make sure that discussion comes to the forefront. So.
Mayor, if I could,
please continue.
I wanted to make it clear, but I think I should, in fairness, amplify. So there has been a misunderstanding within the community, for the record, not with this city council, but within the community, and I've continued to hear it, and I hopefully now we can put it to rest. The HUD funds that were used to contribute to the construction of these garages were used on the basis of the urgent need national objective. So once the garages were completed and became operational, as far as HUD was concerned, they met the requirements. In terms of the agreement with HUD, with any of our 3 grant programs, HUD has no further expectations on the garages other than they continue to be maintained and operated. Conversely, therefore, the city is free, subject to whatever ultimately unfolds, is free to do whatever they want in terms of the garages and on top of the garages. And again, HUD will have no interest whatsoever. The reason that I was originally the one that recommended, along with the then city manager, defaulting the developer was that there was a rent due to be paid in the garage. And 52% of that rent was program income due to the city for the CDBG DR grant, known as Allocation 1. When they did not pay I believe it was 2 years' worth of rent they defaulted. And therefore, from a HUD perspective, there needed to be action taken to default the developer for not meeting that particular element. So that was the reason why we were involved from the HUD standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Any follow-up questions for John at this time? Thank you. I think as we take a look 60 days down the road, and for whatever time period it is, whether that be partnerships with other developing entities, but I agree that very much this is the time for, I think, thoughtful process in taking a look at what the best use and utilization of those will be to get them fully utilized for the asset that they really are and were meant to be. Any other discussion items? Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, just a quick apology for missing the staff picnic on the 21st. I'm glad that Mark was able to attend. And I bring this up because in the past, in the past, council members have not even been informed of meetings like this. So we haven't even had the chance to informally socialize with staff and thank them for their accomplishments and share the joys of a summer picnic. And I think this really relates to a broader theme of the council and staff interacting much more than I've seen in the past in a much more positive way. For example, the department heads were present for the majority of our of our council retreat back a month and a half ago. And clearly, they've played a closer role in informing us about budgetary issues and things going on with their departments when it came to the budget tours. So I see this as an important thing to interact both formally and informally with city staff, and I very much appreciate the invitation and regret I wasn't able to be there. I had to be in Fargo for some medical care, but hopefully there'll be many more picnics, and the staff and council members will continue to socialize and work together more closely as we have been.
Further discussion items? Seeing none, that takes us to number 10, and that is adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Bittner. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Ross. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.